He rejected his brother's widow, until his sister-in-law showed her beautiful figure to him. The landing pad lights cut through the evening mist as Mateo Vega's shuttle touched down on the expansive grounds of the Vega family estate. 6 months had passed since his brother Elias's fatal accident aboard the diplomatic vessel Artemis, and Mateo had delayed his return as long as possible. Now faced with settling his brother's affairs and meeting the alien woman who had become his sister-in-law, he could postpone it no longer. "Welcome home, sir." The estate's AI greeted him as the main doors slid open. "Ms. Lyra has been notified of your arrival." Mateo nodded curtly, his jaw tight. He hadn't wanted a reception committee, especially not from her. The grand entryway still bore his brother's touches, the ancient Earth artifacts displayed alongside treasures from a dozen worlds. Mateo paused before a holograph of Elias smiling broadly on his wedding day, arm wrapped around his purple-skinned bride, her black wavy hair adorned with luminescent flowers from her homeworld. "You've come at last." The voice was melodic, yet reserved. Mateo turned to face Lyra for the first time. She stood at the entrance to the east wing, dressed in the silvery morning colors of her people. Her violet skin seemed paler than in the images he'd seen, and her dark eyes held a wariness that matched his own. "There was much to arrange at the Mars colony," Mateo said stiffly. "I came as soon as I could." 3 months after the funeral, Lyra observed, her four-fingered hand, a characteristic of her species, gently touching the banister as she descended the stairs. "I sent my condolences," Mateo countered, bristling at the implied criticism. "Yes, a recorded message." Her expression remained carefully neutral. "You look like him." The comparison stung. "We were twins." "It happens." An awkward silence fell between them. Mateo knew what Elias would expect of him. Graciousness, warmth toward the woman his brother had loved enough to defy family expectations. But all he could see when he looked at Lyra was the distraction that had cost his brother his life. "I've prepared the study with the estate documents," Lyra finally said. "The inheritance matters require your biometric confirmation. We can handle it tomorrow. I'd prefer to rest now." Something flickered in her eyes, disappointment perhaps, or resignation. "Of course. Your room is ready in the West Wing. I've stayed in our quarters in the East." Mateo nodded, relieved for the distance. "Good, that's good." As he moved toward the stairs, Lyra's voice stopped him. "He spoke of you often, you know. He was proud of your work in the colonies." Mateo didn't turn back. "And he abandoned his own work for diplomacy with Nexus Prime. Look where that led him." He felt rather than saw her stiffen behind him. When he finally glanced back, Lyra's face had composed itself into a perfect mask, betraying nothing of the pain his words must have caused. "The AI will show you to your room," she said quietly. "Good night, Mateo." The Vega estate had always been a marvel of architecture, blending Earth's classical design with advanced technology from across the galaxy. Now it felt more like a mausoleum to Mateo. Every corridor held echoes of Elias's laughter, every room a memory he wasn't ready to face. 3 days into his stay, Mateo had successfully avoided prolonged contact with Lyra. They exchanged necessary pleasantries over estate matters, signing documents and transferring access codes, but little more. He noticed, however, that she maintained his brother's affairs with meticulous care. The garden still flourished, the staff treated her with genuine respect, and Elias's research remained carefully preserved. On the 4th night, a severe electromagnetic storm hit the region. Mateo was reviewing old family records when the estate's power grid fluctuated, sending emergency systems into overdrive. "Warning, primary life support compromised. Secondary systems engaged," announced the AI. "Atmospheric regulators failing in East Wing Section E7. Mateo hesitated only a moment before rushing down the hallway. E7 contained the environmental control hub and Lyra's quarters. He found her already at the control panel, her slender purple fingers moving with practiced precision across the interface. Her long black hair was tied back, revealing the delicate ridges along her neck that marked her Nexian heritage. "The auxiliary coupling is overheating," she said without looking up. "We'll lose air purification if it fails." "Move aside," Mateo said more harshly than intended. "I know this system." To his surprise, Lyra stepped back without protest. "The diagnostic shows cascade failure potential. We need to manually override." Working together in tense silence, they managed to stabilize the system. When the danger had passed, Mateo found himself standing closer to Lyra than he had since arriving. The faint, unfamiliar scent of her, something like cinnamon and ozone, caught him off guard. "You learned our systems well," he said, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. "Elias taught me." Her dark eyes met his directly. "He said I should understand the house as well as any Vega, if I was to be one." Something in her tone made him look at her, really look at her, for the first time. The grief etched in the set of her shoulders, the determined lift of her chin, the shadows beneath her eyes. "Did you love him?" The question escaped before he could stop himself. Lyra's expression softened momentarily, revealing vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. "With everything I am," she answered simply. The storm outside intensified, rattling the ancient windows. Lyra glanced upward as if measuring its strength. "The eastern shields won't hold under this pressure," she said, already moving toward the door. "They need reinforcement." "You can't go out in this," Mateo protested automatically. Lyra paused, one purple hand on the doorframe. "I've weathered worse storms than this, Mateo, both literal and otherwise." As she disappeared down the corridor, Mateo stood frozen, struck by the quiet dignity in her words. For just a moment he had glimpsed the woman his brother had chosen. Not just an alien diplomat, but a person of strength and resilience. The AI chimed softly, interrupting his thoughts. "Eastern shield deterioration at critical levels, sir. Assistance recommended." With a muttered curse, Mateo hurried after Lyra into the storm. The radiation storm bathed the estate grounds in an eerie purple glow, ironically similar to the shade of Lyra's skin. Mateo found her at the eastern perimeter, manually adjusting the shield generators. The protective gear she wore wasn't properly sealed at the wrists, exposing strips of her violet skin to the potentially harmful radiation. "What are you doing?" Mateo shouted over the howl of the wind. "The AI can handle this remotely." "The sensors are damaged," Lyra called back, her black hair whipping around her face despite being tied back. "Someone needs to realign them physically." Mateo cursed and moved to her side. Noticing how her hands trembled slightly from exertion, she had been working for some time, he realized. The indicator lights on the generator panel blinked erratically as she meticulously adjusted each circuit. "Let me," he insisted, reaching for the tools. Their fingers brushed, and he was surprised by the warmth of her skin. Nexians typically ran cooler than humans. "You're burning up," he said, alarmed. "How long have you been out here?" Lyra shrugged, wincing slightly. "Since the first fluctuations? About 2 hours. 2? Mateo stared at her in disbelief. "That's too much radiation exposure, even for your physiology." "These shields protect his garden," she said simply, as though that explained everything. "The native earth plants he brought from your childhood home." The realization struck Mateo like a physical blow. Elias's garden, the recreation of their grandmother's garden from Argentina, had been his brother's pride. That Lyra would risk radiation sickness to preserve it spoke volumes. A sudden surge in the storm sent a piece of debris flying toward them. Without thinking, Mateo pulled Lyra against him, shielding her with his body as the metal fragment clattered harmlessly against his protected back. For a moment they remained frozen, faces inches apart, her dark eyes wide with surprise. Mateo became acutely aware of her body against his, slender but strong, her 2 arms instinctively clutching his shoulders, her breathing rapid. Something shifted in his perception of her. No longer just his brother's widow, but a woman of flesh and blood, of courage and determination. "We need to finish together and get inside," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "You need medical attention." To his surprise, Lyra nodded without argument. They worked side by side, movements becoming synchronized as they repaired the critical sections of the shield. When the final connection was made, the barrier hummed back to life, its protective dome shimmering above the garden. Back inside the medical bay, Mateo insisted on treating her radiation exposure himself. As he applied the healing serum to her wrists, he noticed faint scars crisscrossing her purple skin, older injuries that had nothing to do with today's incident. "From the diplomatic crisis on Centauri outpost," she explained, catching his gaze. "Before I met Elias, you were there?" Mateo couldn't hide his surprise. "That negotiation saved thousands of lives." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I was junior envoy then. Your brother found the scars fascinating. He said they told the story of someone who fought for what they believed in." For the first time, Matteo glimpsed the person his brother had fallen in love with, not just for her exotic beauty, but for a spirit that matched Elias's own passionate nature. "Rest now," he said, more gently than he had spoken to her before. "The garden is safe." As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "Matteo, thank you for helping me save his legacy." In that moment, he realized they shared something profound. Not just grief for Elias, but a desire to honor what he had loved. A morning light streamed through the estate's crystal dome, creating prisms of color across the breakfast table where Matteo sat reviewing reports. A week had passed since the storm, and his perception of Lyra had undergone a subtle transformation. He found himself watching her interactions with the estate staff, the gentle way she spoke with the aging gardener, her patient explanations to the maintenance droids, even her methodical feeding of the exotic birds Elias had collected. "You've previewed the quarterly allocations?" Lyra asked, entering the solarium with a datapad. Her long black wavy hair was partially braided today, revealing more of her face. The radiation treatment had restored her purple skin to its vibrant hue, highlighting the elegant contours of her features. "Yes," Matteo replied, surprising himself by pulling out a chair for her. "Your management of the research grants is impressive." Lyra blinked, clearly not expecting the compliment. Elias believed in supporting young scientists. "I'm merely continuing his vision." "You've done more than continue it," Matteo acknowledged, sliding a projection across the table. "Applications have increased 30% under your administration." A faint violet blush colored her cheeks. "Scientific advancement was important to both our worlds. It's what brought us together initially." Matteo found himself wanting to know more. "How did you meet?" Elias never went into detail in his messages. Lyra's expression softened with memory. "The Interspecies Medical Conference on Luna Station. My delegation was presenting Nexian regenerative techniques, and Elias was there researching applications for human physiology. Her fingers, 5 of them, an unusual genetic variation among her people that had made her the subject of childhood teasing, traced patterns on the tablecloth. He asked questions no one else thought to ask. He saw possibilities others missed. Something in her voice made Matteo's chest tighten. It was the same passionate curiosity that had defined his twin since childhood. "That sounds like Elias," he said quietly. Later that day, he found Lyra in the library, reaching for a book on a high shelf. The sunlight silhouetted her slender form, and Matteo found himself noticing the graceful line of her neck, the determined set of her shoulders. When she turned and saw him watching, something electric passed between them, a moment of recognition that left them both unsettled. That night, unable to sleep, Matteo wandered to Elias's study. He found himself drawn to his brother's journals, seeking understanding. The entries revealed a man deeply in love, not just with Lyra's otherworldly beauty, but with her mind, her principles, her strength. "She challenges every assumption," Elias had written. "She makes me see beyond my limited human perspective. With Lyra, I've discovered parts of myself I never knew existed." Matteo closed the journal, conflicted. The wall of resentment he had built was crumbling, replaced by uncomfortable awareness, not just of Lyra as his brother's widow, but as a woman who stirred feelings he had no right to experience. At dinner, their conversation flowed more easily than before. Lyra shared stories of her homeworld, its floating cities and bioluminescent forests, while Matteo found himself recounting childhood adventures with Elias. Their laughter mingled, then suddenly stopped as both remembered the absence at the table's head. "He would be glad we're finally talking," Lyra said softly. Matteo met her gaze across the table. "Would he be glad about everything I'm thinking?" The question hung in the air between them, unspoken implications clear. Lyra's dark eyes widened slightly, her purple fingers tightening around her glass. "Some grief is too fresh for certain questions," she finally replied, her voice barely above a whisper. That night, in separate wings of the vast house, both lay awake, troubled by emotions neither had anticipated. The projection room had been Elias's sanctuary, a place where art and technology merged to create three-dimensional memories. Matteo had avoided it until now, but finalizing the estate required cataloging its contents. He stepped through the doorway, bracing himself for the wave of grief that would surely come. Instead, he found himself transfixed by the unfinished holographic portrait hovering in the center of the room. Lyra captured in a moment of unguarded joy, her purple skin luminescent, her black wavy hair flowing freely, her dark eyes alive with emotion. Elias had begun mapping the complex algorithms that would make the image fully dimensional but had never completed it. The half-finished portrait flickered slightly, beautiful yet incomplete, like so many of Elias's dreams. He worked on it whenever I was away on diplomatic missions. Matteo turned to find Lyra in the doorway, silhouetted against the corridor lights. She wore a simple dress of silver blue that complemented her violet skin, her hair loose around her shoulders. "It's remarkable," Matteo said honestly. "He captured your essence." "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the room's control panel. Matteo stepped aside, watching as her fingers danced across the interface with practiced ease. The room darkened, then filled with stars, a perfect recreation of the Nexus Prime night sky. "This was our special place," Lyra explained, her voice soft with memory. "When either of us felt homesick, we would recreate the sky of our homeworlds." She moved through the projection, stars seeming to shimmer around her as if she were a celestial being herself. The effect was mesmerizing, her purple form bathed in starlight, her eyes reflecting distant constellations. "I've been unfair to you," Matteo said suddenly. "I blamed you for distracting him, for changing his focus from science to diplomacy." Lyra turned to face him, stars swirling around them both. "He changed his focus because he believed in building bridges between our worlds. It wasn't my doing, it was his choice." "I know that now," Matteo admitted, reading his journals, seeing how he lived here with you. "I understand what he saw in you." The air between them seemed charged with unspoken feelings. Lyra took a step closer, starlight playing across her features. "In our culture, we believe souls recognize each other across lifetimes," she said carefully. "When I first saw you, even through my grief and your anger, something felt familiar." Matteo's heart pounded. "Because I remind you of him?" "No," she whispered. "Because you're you, Matteo, different from him in ways I'm only beginning to understand." His hand reached out, hovering near her face without touching. "What are we doing, Lyra?" "Finding our way forward," she answered, honoring what was while acknowledging what is. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Matteo traced the delicate ridge along her cheekbone, marveling at the softness of her skin. Her eyes closed briefly at his touch, her two hands, with their 5 slender fingers, coming to rest against his chest. "Elias would want us both to be happy," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But this can't be rushed. We need time to know if this is real or merely shared grief seeking comfort." Matteo nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. "We have time. The estate is settled, but I don't have to leave immediately. And I have 3 months before my diplomatic duties recall me," Lyra added. Around them, the stars of 2 different worlds merged and danced. In the center of the room, the unfinished, holographic portrait of Lyra flickered, a reminder of a love that had been making space for what might someday be. "One day at a time," Matteo said softly. Lyra's hand found his, their fingers intertwining, human and alien, 5 fingers to 5, different yet complementary. "One day at a time," she agreed. The holographic stars continued their eternal dance. Around them, illuminating 2 figures standing close together, not rushing toward their future but no longer trapped in their past. In the gentle starlight, they began the delicate process of discovering if the connection they felt was strong enough to build something new from the foundations of shared loss. As they stood together beneath the light of distant worlds, both felt the weight of grief beginning to lift, not forgotten but transformed into something that might, with time and care, bloom into unexpected joy.